if you can see from this slide, so while the population of both countries is small in comparison to India, if you see the per capita income of these countries, in purchasing parity terms, they are 10 times more than India. So the consumption of goods and services by these countries, the population will be much more than average person in India. So that's why if you can see the trade aspects, so they are comparable with both India's exports and imports more or less. If you see, their exports are comparable with India for the year 2019. So there is significant opportunity for India to enhance our exports to these countries, and also when we choose these countries, there are also a lot of complementarity that existed between both India and these countries, because as I said, these are developed countries more or less, although UAE is still as a developing country status at the WTO, but there is complementarity. We hardly compete in very few sectors. So UAE has only industry in a couple of sectors like petrochemicals and metals, while Australia, the contribution of manufacturing sector is hardly less than 7% to the GDP. Mostly Australian economy is service oriented, close to 74% of its GDP. And mostly Australia exports raw materials to India, especially coal, which comprises 74% of the total exports to India. As you know, coking coal is deficient in India, and it is a very important raw material for the steel and aluminum industry. So even by reducing the duty of on coal from 2.5 to 1% also, 0% also, the overall Indian industry will benefit. Next slide. So this is just to give you an overview of the trade. So as I said, when we see the imports from UAE, there are mostly 40% are essential imports, which is petroleum products, and some are re-exports, which are not being covered under the agreement. We have stringent rules of origin where UAE re-exports will not get any duty concessions. If you see the direct exports in the year 2019, 6.5 billion was the direct exports where there was a value addition in UAE, which fulfills the substantial change criteria. So there also 50% we are importing from UAE is gold, which is around 50% of our imports from UAE. Next. So as I mentioned already, Australia we have trade deficit, but that is due to the essential import of coal from Australia, which comprises close to 74% of overall coal imports into India are from Australia. Next. So here you can see the scope of the agreements. So basically these are very deep and comprehensive agreements which India has signed after a period of 10 years. Last year we had signed a small agreement with Mauritius, but it is a very small agreement where only 5% of the tariff lines have been covered. Unlike these two agreements, they are very deep. You can see the scope. So the chapters, these are in red color, are common to both agreements. We have the goods, services, rules of origin and others. And some two chapters are specific to Australia, which is the movement of natural persons, which is very important to India because it will facilitate movement of our professionals from India to Australia and work there and settle there. Second is transparency. So some other chapters are specific to UAE agreement. These are the new chapters for India in any FTA so far. They are digital trade, government procurement, SMEs, intellectual property, and investment facilitation. So Australia, we have done an interim agreement with agreement in goods and services and other areas. But both countries have agreed that by end of this year, we will again start negotiations and again try to conclude the other chapters which are shown in blue in this slide. Next. So this is a very important for all of you present here, the business community based in Hyderabad. So you can see now most of the products like around 33 billion if you include both Australia and India, our exports to these countries in 2019. So most of these products attract at least 5% import duty by these countries. Now you can see immediately UAE is providing market access on 90% of our products of export interest from May 1. So I would like to inform that we have signed the agreement with UAE on 18th of February and agreement with Australia on 2nd of April. So for the UAE agreement, both countries have ratified and the agreement is going to enter into force from 1st of May, which is hardly 1 week's time, 1 week's from now. So this is very significant so that industry can simply from 1st of May, you can start availing concession and export, increase your exports to UAE. And similarly, Australia, if you see, 98.3% of our current exports, you get zero duty on day one. But Australia, the implementation will take some time because currently Australia, there are elections in Australia and the agreement has to be ratified by the parliament. So it will take maybe 2-3 months time for Australia to ratify and then it will enter into force. But UAE will be entering into force from 1st of next month. And overall, if you see, UAE is providing tariff concessions to India on 97% of its tariff lines, which amounts to 99% of India's exports to UAE. And similarly, Australia is giving 100% duty-free access to Indian products. So that is a very significant achievement in consideration to Australia. So you can see the products of export interest. Most of the products are also important to Telangana state, especially gems and jewellery, textiles and apparel, agriculture commodities. We have leather, footwear, pharmaceutical products and engineering products. All the products are labor intensive and a huge potential to generate employment also in Telangana and also overall in India. So most products which are of in sensitive nature like agriculture products, like dairy and other products which are especially for the MSME sector, we have excluded, India has not offered any concessions to either UAE or Australia. And I would also like to emphasize that whatever concessions we are given to these two countries, so those will serve as raw materials to the Indian manufacturers and we can also benefit for the domestic consumer as well also in the export markets. Like for example, we have given concessions to import polyethylene and polypropylene from UAE to India, which will benefit our plastic industry. We are giving 1% duty concession on gold, import of gold, which will benefit our MSME in the jewellery sector. Like similarly, Australia, we are giving, like as I said, importing coal from Australia, which will benefit our, reduce the cost of production of steel and aluminium. So whatever concessions we are given to these two countries, India will benefit by imports also. So that's what I said. There is a lot of complementarity between these two countries, partner countries, and it is a win-win agreement for India and these countries. Next. So services. So when they, if you see, look at the agreement on trade in services with these two partner countries, we have a deeper agreement on services trade with Australia. So Australia, except something in the negative list, it has opened all the subsectors to India, over 135 subsectors. So some of the important things here which are relevant for Telangana state, as Telangana, most of the students study either in US, UK or Australia. So students who complete their study in Australia, so they will be assured of a work permit after study from 18 months to 4 years. For diploma holders, it will be 18 months. For graduation, 2 years. For masters, 3 years. And if they do PhDs, they will get 4 years post-study work visa. And also, Australia has agreed to give 1,800 visas every year to allow our chefs and yoga teachers to go to Australia and work there. The visa will be initially for a period of 4 years, which will be extendable every year. And also, one important thing for young people is who are between the age of 18 to 30, Australia has agreed to provide work and holiday visa. Means the people who go there, young people who can work for 6 months and take a break for 6 months. So that also will benefit a lot of people from Telangana. And one important thing is, under the agreement, Australia has agreed to enter into negotiations on the mutual recognition of the professional degrees, like our medical degree or engineering degree, other degrees. So our responsible councils, they will enter into agreements for mutual recognition of degrees. So as I mentioned, 1/3 of the population in UAE is already Indian. So UAE has already offered concessions, but in most of the sectors already more than required Indians are working in UAE. Next. So we have taken very good measures to protect the interests of the Indian industry. Because UAE is the entry port and a lot of products are transshipped from UAE. So we have stringent rules of origin of 40% value addition with UAE, and also similarly for Australia also. And some of the things we have done for the first time with these countries, like we have a rules of origin called melt and pour for the steel products, where they cannot import any other steel product, do some value addition and re-export. Any steel coming out of the blast furnace only will be allowed to manufacture downstream products also. That is a very important thing we have done under both the agreements. And we also have safeguard mechanisms in both the agreements. And also the first time there is a special review clause after 15 years. This is the first time we have done with Australia. And one of the important thing which is there in both the agreements is the mutual recognition agreement on pharmaceutical products. UAE, there is a definitive commitment that UAE will offer market access to all the pharmaceutical products which have been registered in 6 developed countries like USA, Canada, UK, EU, Australia and Japan. Automatically within 90 days of registration in these countries, UAE will give market access, marketing authorization also. Not only registration, but also you can simply market. So as and when you file some ANDA in US, you can start preparing for this market also, all the pharmaceutical companies based in Hyderabad. So this is a very good thing for UAE market. Even Australia also, they have also entered into a similar agreement, but on a limited scale. So they said they will put all the such applications in a fast track mode where the products already have recognition in the developed markets. So Australia already, the overall, I understand that the pharmaceutical market is 12 billion, but Indian exports to Australia is very limited, the percentage. So we hope overall pharmaceutical companies of India and especially based in Telangana will also benefit from both these agreements. Next. So this is a projection given by the industry, especially the Export Promotion Council. So we are expecting the trade, what is the current trade in 2019 and what is the additional trade we are expecting. So currently we are exporting around 28 billion to UAE. We are expecting it to reach 50 billion in 5 years' time. So UAE, we are expecting that it will create 10 lakh jobs in India. You can see all the sectors are labor intensive like plastics, textiles, leather, engineering and gems and jewellery. Next. So similarly, Australia also, there is significant potential. You can see most of the products we are exporting to Australia are currently dutiable. So once we get duty-free access, we can significantly increase our exports because Australia currently has FTAs with most of the important trading partners like ASEAN. They are also party to RCEF, and also they have agreements with other countries, Europe and other countries. So now we had this duty issue. Now our companies can compete with all these other countries with whom Australia has already FTAs. Next. So what is the new thing we have done? Earlier agreements, we already have agreements with Japan, Korea, ASEAN and some other countries. Earlier, enough consultation was not done, but this time we have ensured that we have done consultation with all the industry stakeholders and also all the other government departments. So for UAE, I have done many consultations with, I think some of you from Hyderabad have also participated in some of the consultations. And that's why this time, like we have signed 2 agreements in 2 months period, and you don't, I can confidently say that I have not seen any negative article so far on any of the trade agreements, both these agreements. Next. So coming to Telangana exports to Australia, you can see the Telangana exports to Australia is very little. It is hardly 72 million in the first 11 months of last financial year. But overall, the Telangana exports, global exports are growing. There is a secular trend. If you can see, from 1920, it was 7.3 billion. It has increased to 8.7 billion. Now already it is 9.9. I think when the final figures for the month of March will also be released, I think the Telangana exports last financial year, it will reach around 11 billion. So that is a significant increase in the exports of Telangana. But however, exports of Telangana comprises of only 3% of the global exports of India. So still there is a lot of scope for Telangana also to at least reach 5% of the overall exports of India. So there is a lot of scope. Next. So as I mentioned, UAE is an important market for India and also for Telangana. So UAE is the third largest export destination for Telangana also. So first I think it is US, second maybe Japan or some other country, and third it is UAE. You can see already in the first 11 months of this last financial year, we have exported 437 million US dollar worth of products. And if you just to extrapolate, I think overall it will be 500 million US dollar for this last financial year. So once the FTA with UAE enters into force from 1st of May, we see that a lot of scope for products from Telangana like gems and jewellery, pharmaceutical products, and also other engineering products. And we can see textiles also is there. Also agriculture products like meat, we have scope, leather products. So a lot of products, there are a lot of scope for enhancing exports from Telangana. So we hope that this agreement will enable all of you to increase your exports. I hope in 5 years' time, I think Telangana should export only to UAE around 2 billion US dollars. So that we should all put the target so that it will also create at least, we should try to create with both this agreement around 200,000 jobs only in Telangana state. So that should be the objective of all the businesses currently present here in this room. So you should try to increase your exports and try to create more job opportunity and also wealth creation in the state of Telangana. Thank you. Thank you all.